What's up, guys? We are back with another review, taking a look at something a little bit different, but honestly something I've had my eye on for a little while just because of how, I don't know, underserved dinosaur action figures are. So we're taking a look today at this guy. This is the AxyToys Dinosaur Battlefield Dinosaur Warrior. And this is from, I got it from 5K Toys. You know, if you're familiar with them, they have a lot of third-party import stuff. And this has probably been the talk of the town for a little while just because of how wacky it is. It's an actual dinosaur action figure. It very much looks kind of like Mythic Legions-esque in many ways. So there's a lot of cool stuff here that definitely speaks to my interest. Mythic Legions mashed up with dinosaurs. Kind of sells itself, right? Now, it comes in, honestly, a pretty solid box for kind of an unlicensed product, really, and it has a lenticular cover, which I'm not sure if it really gets picked up all that well, but it shows the two versions of this figure. There's a green one and a brown one. This is the green one inside, and they are labeled with stickers to tell you which one you got, but it has a lenticular, which we don't see all that often on product packaging, but I do really like that. So you've got a product shot there on the front, and then the spines have the heads for the respective green and brown, and then the back of the box has product shots for the two color versions. It also has like a flap, so you can pop that open, and you've kind of got a story here with like a bio of what they're trying to do in terms of world building, and then you've got the figure there in the big window. So if you want to keep him in the box for some reason, you can. But we're not here to do that, so let's pull them out and take a look. And here we go, out of the package, our AxyToys Dino Warrior. Again, a figure that, I mean, at the very least has captured my attention for a while now just because of how different it is. It's a Dino Man, Dino Barbarian. What's not to at least be slightly interested about, really? So something a little bit different, something a little bit new, kind of feels like a very familiar kind of figure. Like there's a lot of stuff here that I kind of understand right out of the gate. I know what they're going for, but he's also very much his own thing too. And before we get started, you know, really get into this guy, I want to give a thanks and a shout out over to the folks at 5K Toys. They actually sent this dude in for review, and I'm going to put all the information you need to find them, find their shop, find their store, and get this guy in particular if you still want to get in on the pre-order. It'll all be down in the description. So let's see what this guy can do, see how he moves around. For the most part, pretty happy with him. I definitely think there's maybe some room to improve in the future, but for what seems to be like kind of a first run of a Dino Man, I'm pretty curious to see more. So we've got a head that is definitely weird. So when it comes to the design of this figure, the head is the thing that I'm sure stands out as kind of like the oddball part because of how it's constructed. He's kind of like a Carnotaurus, at least is what it sort of looks like to me, and they've got that sort of lurched forward head. As a result, he does have some fairly limited head and neck articulation, so he can really only bobble up and down. It's a ball peg, but it only goes so far, and there's really only a little bit of twist side to side. Not much more than that. You do have an articulated jaw, however. Get that there. So he can get his mouth open all the way, which does look really good. Obviously, it aids in a little bit of excitement when you're posing him. Arms go out at the shoulder. They will, of course, rotate. And, you know, he's got these shoulder pads. Well, knocked a piece off here, obviously. You do have to worry about this a little bit. A lot of this figure is modular in some ways. Like you can make him naked if you really wanted to. And all of these pieces are just sort of pegged into the figure. So you've got your arm there that can go out, and the shoulder pad will move. It doesn't go all the way around, but it does get out of the way quite a bit. We've got a bicep swivel. You've got single jointed elbows, but you get 90. And then you've got your swivel and hinge. It's a ball hinge at the wrist. So really good movement there, even though he's got this piece here. So this piece right here is able to, you know, if you wanted to, you could take it off if you need to, but it'll also kind of pop out a little bit just to maybe give him a little bit more room to maneuver if you really needed to do that. As far as the torso goes, so you've got a diaphragm cut here. So he can go forward and backward a little bit. Pretty good tilt side to side, and then you've got your rotation also. You do also have a waist twist down here in conjunction with that, so you can sort of, you know, aid in moving him around a little bit more. Legs go out about this far, and I say about this far because, again, he is going to be hindered because of all the stuff he's wearing. If you take him fully apart and you get all of this off and you want to have a naked Dino Man, he is going to be more movable and more posable. It's just the way it goes. But he does have a lot of stuff on him. You know, for even having all of this, he does have really good range. Kicking forward is going to go about that far. And then he doesn't really go back too far. You do have your thigh twist up here. This is very similar to like the NECA, like a ball socket kind of situation up in there. And then we've got our single jointed knee. It goes back not 90, but a good bit for kind of a big tree trunk kind of leg. And then you do have some shimmy up there. There's a little bit of rotation. And then we've got our ankles, which I was really confused about these at first, because if you look on the product page, they have a lot of pictures posing him where he's butt naked. And it shows that he can move his ankles in particular in a really, really crazy way. And it took me a minute to figure out what they were doing. It does work, but it's also kind of a cheat almost. So you've got really good hinge forward and backward. And then you've got rotation. He doesn't necessarily have a rocker down here. So they were showing him where his legs were like fully splayed out. What they were doing is they would rotate them and then they would rock them. So it kind of hides it with that armor, and it allows him to do something like this, where his leg is more splayed out, but his foot is actually twisted. So when you twist it, you do have a little bit of a rocker, because then you've got clearance on that ball. Otherwise, he doesn't really, because it's a straight peg down. It's not a forward-facing pin. So you will have to play around with that if you want to try to do it. You can kind of fudge it because you've got this ankle armor down here to cover it, but you got to watch it. Don't try to rock it like it's a normal rocker ankle. And then we've got our tail. Now this is interesting. This is kind of weird. It is not a ball peg back here like I kind of expected it would be. It's this just sort of weird tab. So you've got this tab that you just sort of peg the tail on, but the tail is bendy. So it doesn't really matter what's going on with that ball. And it's actually pretty bendy too. Like, it works really well. Not too many issues, but you do get a little bit of movement here. It's just not like all the way around, so there's no rotation or anything, unfortunately. So you can't rotate it right at like the butt crack. But you've got enough to bend it, and then it will crook, and you can use it as a support if you need to. You shouldn't really need to, but of course it will work as a support. You know, if you just want to be a little more cautious with him, you can use the tail, put it on the ground, but he'll be able to stand just fine otherwise. So he does move pretty well. Again, you know, he seemed kind of familiar. There's a lot of familiar territory when it comes to this figure. If there's one area that I kind of wish had more posability, it's the head and the neck, and that's mostly because of the design of this figure. With that head being so lurched forward, you know, when you're looking straight at him, you can't see his facial features all that well because of the design of the head. So you can't really do much except sort of crook it to the side and then maybe lift it up a little bit, or lift it, you know, push it down, something like that, to really get some of that face in view. But otherwise, despite the fact that he does have single joints, range is pretty solid, and I've not had too many issues posing him around. And again, you know, if you really want to get crazy with him and you want a naked dinosaur, you can remove all of this armor, and he does become a lot more posable just by virtue of not having a ton, I mean a literal ton of stuff on top of the figure. But ultimately, when it comes to this guy, I'm kind of going at this the same way I go at any kind of like Mythic Legions figure. This guy was ultimately about the look and just what they were able to create here, because again, when you think about it at face value, a Dinosaur Man seems like an easy sell. Like, there's not a lot out there for that kind of thing. So why not go for something like that? And when you mix him with, like, you know, barbarian style armor, you're definitely going for a certain market. And I'm pretty happy with the finished product here. He's not perfect. And again, a lot of my concern for this figure when it comes to the visuals is really still just the head sculpt. And not that the head is bad, but because of the type of head. Like, I kind of wish it was just maybe like, I don't know, like a Triceratops head or something, just for, you know, ease of discussion, just sitting on top of there like a normal head, instead of this head that has to be lurched forward and crooked and, you know, kind of sitting a specific way. Because in many ways, that makes it look small to me. It makes the head look smaller than it actually is, when it's really not. There is a lot of head up there. It's just a very specific design. The rest of this figure, though, I normally don't talk about the heads first, but the rest of the figure is pretty wild. There is a ton of detail all over this guy. I mean, literally almost every aspect of this figure is covered in sort of a scaly skin, tons of paint. I mean, there's all kinds of, like, especially if you look at the back, and you know, it'll be different on the brown, orange one, whatever color we want to call it. But the green one does have a lot of this like light green, browns, blacks, and all of this sort of like striped nature. You can really see it on the tail in particular. There's a lot of shading. There's a lot of weathering to his skin tones in particular that just make the sculpt stand out and make him look really, really detailed. Not to mention the fact that there is a tremendous amount of armor. And you know, I've said it a handful of times already, it's all removable. So you can pop the figure apart and you can start taking that off. I will mention that doing that, it might be a little, you know, easier said than done, because I've had some issues taking some of these joints apart. The hands in particular really don't want to come out for me. The feet really don't want to come out for me. Things like that. But overall, you can take this guy apart, pop him apart at the chest, pull that loincloth off, all that stuff. And all of these spikes, well, maybe not all of them, but most of them, like these on the gauntlets, these crazy like crooked ones on the loincloth here, this guy, this little, you know, sort of thing here, these bone pieces, the necklace, the sheath, all of these spikes on the shin guards, all that stuff you actually have to put on yourself too. So it's not packaged like that, which I think is probably a good thing. So they arrive relatively unscathed, right? I will urge maybe a word of caution. They are, you know, they're very sharp. So this does not conform to safety standards, I'm sure. These are really, really sharp. They're very pointy. They offer you no protection. So beware when you're handling this guy. You might find yourself with, I don't know, a little boo-boo here and there. But he looks absolutely menacing. Like, I love this belt sort of codpiece thing that he's got on. It's super, super just big and gaudy. They've got all of this sort of like faux leather going on. We've got soft goods on this figure, and they're pretty good too. This reminds me of from Mythic Legion's Cassia's fur cloak that she wears. It seems very similar to that in many ways. And it's just a really, really wild looking figure. Again, my only real gripe, I really think my only real gripe about it is that I kind of wish they had gone with a different kind of dinosaur to make this head sculpt. I feel like something else a little bit more large and with like maybe a frill on top might have done it a little bit more of a service. But again, if this is the beginnings, then why not have a bunch of different dinosaurs? And this still does look really good. The sculpt is great. Paint is really well done. The eyes are incredibly piercing. And I mean, even the teeth and the mouth on the inside, like there's a lot of detail inside that mouth. All of that sort of nasty, almost like, you know, salivating pink color in there. But ultimately, it's all about the overall look, the overall idea and design with this guy. And if you're looking for something that's a little bit different to mix into your fantasy stuff, your sword and sorcery kind of figures, this might be right up your alley, because I mean, he's a huge reptile man, you know, not taking into consideration the fact that it's a dinosaur. His body looks very, you know, reptilian, very much like alligator skin in many ways. So you've got that going for him. And then he's just got all of this armor. And I love the way they've got this like 2 layers of armor on here. So like all this stuff is removable. You can pop this piece off on the top here. So like this stuff comes apart. It's all kind of modular in many ways. You know, all these spikes that I mentioned, I'm pretty sure I have them where they need to go, but you can kind of mix and match them. They all have the same sort of peg holes. And then you've got, you know, things like the necklace with the bones, these bone adornments like trophies almost hanging all over them. You've got the sheath for this weird little spiked knife that we'll talk about here in a minute. But it's a great overall package. There's a lot of cool stuff here that very much is familiar, because I'm very much into, you know, fantasy stuff with Mythic Legions, but it's a very different thing at the same time because, well, it's a Dino Man. Now, as far as some size comparisons go, I'm gonna do a decent amount, because of course this guy being its own thing so far, we don't really have any frame of reference. And I've mentioned the Mythic Legions connection, so of course we're gonna have to use those to start with. So we've got a 1.0 figure here on the right. So this is just a recent kit bash I did. So you've got a standard figure here on the right, and we've got our most recent goblin here on the left. He's a dwarf basically with a goblin head, but a smaller figure, and it gives you an idea of just how big this guy is. Again, he's not super, super tall. It is a larger than average figure for sure, but he's going to fit into, if you're going to do this, he's going to fit into Legions as if this was just a race of dinosaur men. So it's not a massive, massive figure that happens to be a dinosaur guy. He's a dinosaur man that sort of fits in with other humanoid races, if that makes any sense. And I mean, I think when you see him, you'll kind of understand what they're going for here. Now, beyond that, let's move these guys aside, and we'll find some other stuff to throw in there. So let's do a Black Series. So here he is with the Marshal. Let's move this guy aside, and let's do a Marvel Legend. Here he is with the one and only Speedball. And I think this is a pretty good idea of exactly how big he is, because he is taller than average, of course, but he's also got a lot of bulk. And this armor really bulks him up, makes him a lot more girthy, gives him a lot of heft at the shoulders and the traps and the waist in particular. And let's move Cobb aside, and here is a NECA Turtle. There's Raph. He is in awe of this dinosaur man. And then one more. Let's do a import figure. So here is the most recent event-exclusive Goku Figuarts, and I think this is a pretty good spread of figures. So you've got your 7-inch, you've got your Hasbro 1/12, and then you've got stuff that doesn't necessarily kind of jive with any of that when it comes to imports, and then NECA Turtle. So this guy is big. He's not super, super massive, but he is going to add some size and have a little shelf presence no matter what you mix him in with. And then as far as accessories goes, at least stuff that I'm going to consider actual accessories, you know, because I've kind of talked about some of the optional parts on this guy, some of the adornments, the necklace, the sheath across the chest. You don't have to use that stuff, but it's part of his look. He does come with a few quote-unquote real accessories, at least is what I consider them. So we've got, to start with, we've got a couple hands. So you've got these wider gripping hands on him in the box, and then you get these smaller gripping hands as far as extra hands. I wish he came with fists or something a little more style posy. These are kind of stylistic in some ways. They can look like, you know, a little bit of a gesturing hand, but these are definitely just specifically gripping hands for the dagger here. And I will say that it has been a real task to actually get these hands off. And I've mentioned it before, you know, all this stuff on this guy is removable really, but getting some of it off is going to require some work to actually heat him up and pop this stuff off. But to get these hands off, I was really worried that they weren't going to come off at all when I was actually messing around with it. So you do have hands, but beware, you know, you maybe don't want to just go ripping them off. Heat it up first if it gives you any trouble, and you'll be fine. Then we get our actual, you know, weaponry. And for this particular release, we do get this really cool little dagger. So it's got this like bone, blade, spike, spine thing coming out of it. And there's a ton of detail on this thing, tons of wash, lots of little sculpt in there, and then this sort of like leather wrap that it has. And then of course, you know, again, this is meant to be slung across his chest when he's not using it, which I think is just really cool. Like, I really like the idea of this in terms of storage, because it does look really good. I mean, it's like front and center, it's right there. And then we get like the signature weapon for this particular release, and this is this crazy crooked axe. So you've got this big wooden handle, and this continues the trend of spiky objects for this release. So no joke, watch out. All of these little spikes in particular, right here, super sharp. You know, I know most people watching this aren't little kids, but it's going to hurt if you grab this thing a little too tight, so be careful. But the sculpt on it, the paint, the little details, it's fantastic. It's got some heft, but it's not too heavy, too, so he can hold it just fine, and it doesn't really, you know, throw him off balance or swing that arm out unnecessarily. A lot of detail in here, and just a cool-looking design. Like, it's a little bit different. It's something familiar, but at the same time, it does seem to be a little bit different. I don't have many other axes that kind of look like this. So ultimately not a ton of stuff with this guy. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff in the box, like I mentioned, because you kind of have to assemble him and to make him look this way. But in terms of actual weaponry and then extra swappable parts, you really just get the hands and then the two weapons, although they are really cool. So yeah, overall with this guy, I am pretty happy with it. It's a weird kind of release. Honestly, that's what it is. Like, it's something very much out of left field. It again, it seems like kind of an underserved thing. Like, Dinosaur guy. Of course, it makes perfect sense. Like, plenty of people are going to be interested in it. And then it very much seems like a Mythic Legions kind of mashup in terms of the style and nature of this figure. So, of course, you kind of capture my interest to begin with. But the figure looks fantastic. Again, my only real gripe with this guy is the idea of this type of head, because it is kind of weird. It's like a Carnotaurus almost, kind of, in terms of its design. And it's that lurched forward look that makes it seem smaller than it is. And then, of course, when you're looking straight at it, it's hard to actually see some of those facial details. The rest of the figure, though, is really cool. Like, he's hulking, he's got some size, but he's not super massive, and then he's got this crazy set of armor, which frankly is really well done. Looks tremendous, tons of detail, and all those little spikes you have to put on. Like, putting him together was just kind of a fun aspect of this figure to begin with, and it's just, again, sort of a weird thing that is going to look really cool with your Legions, or maybe just as kind of a one-off, or whatever these guys do down the road. So that's going to do it for this look at the AxyToys Dino Warrior. Let me know what you guys think. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and share, and until next time.